What happens when Bill Maher, Donald Trump, and Kid Rock sit down for a private dinner at the White House? No cameras, no scripts, just raw conversation? What unfolds isn't a debate, it's something more honest, more surprising, and yes, more human. Stick around because this story doesn't give you sides, it gives you perspective. And by the end, you might just see things differently. Bill Maher had just wrapped an unusually quiet weekend at his Los Angeles home when an unexpected message lit up his phone. It was from Kid Rock. Not a text, but a voicemail, gravelly, casual, and just cryptic enough to be intriguing. "Trump's hosting a small dinner, just a few people. Off the record, you in?" Maher squinted at the screen, unsure if this was a joke or some sort of media trap. But curiosity, that old vice of his, got the better of him. A follow-up call confirmed it. A private dinner at the White House, no cameras, no press, just 4 seats. Donald Trump, Kid Rock, Bill Maher, and one unnamed guest. For balance, Kid Rock had said with a chuckle, the idea was absurd, maybe even reckless, but Maher couldn't shake it. What if it wasn't just political theater? What if, behind closed doors, real conversations could still happen? 3 days later, Maher stepped off a quiet flight into Washington, D.C., the air crisp with the kind of winter stillness that made the city feel smaller than it was. A black SUV awaited him, idling near a side terminal. The driver said nothing, simply handed over a guest pass marked Executive Residence. As they pulled through the White House gates, Maher stared out the window, rehearsing every potential insult, jab, and political landmine that might surface over the course of one unpredictable night. But what he didn't expect, what none of them expected, was that somewhere between the wine and the roast duck, they'd all stop performing, and for the first time in a long time they'd just talk. As the SUV pulled through the east gate of the White House, Bill Maher felt the weight of irony settle in his chest. The last place he ever thought he'd voluntarily visit was here, under this administration, under this roof. The historic residence, bathed in soft amber lighting, looked more like a movie set than the political epicenter of the free world. But the moment was real, and it became more real when a staffer in a navy suit opened the car door and greeted him with a polite nod. "Mr. Mayor, this way, please." He was escorted through side corridors, hallways lined with portraits of presidents he'd mocked for decades. Maher studied the faces as he passed: Nixon, Reagan, Bush. He smirked at the thought, add Trump to the lineup, and this hallway could be my hit list. But the smirk faded as he turned the corner and stepped into the Roosevelt Room. Kid Rock was already there, lounging against a table with a glass of bourbon in hand, dressed in a worn leather jacket and sunglasses. Indoors, of course. "Look what the cat dragged in," he grinned. "Didn't think you'd actually show." Maher shrugged off his coat, still processing the surrealism of it all. "I like weird parties. Besides, how often do you get invited to dinner with a former president and America's favorite walking contradiction?" Before Kid Rock could fire back, a door on the far end opened and in walked Donald Trump. No crowd, no music, no teleprompter, just Trump in a deep blue suit, no tie, and a half smile that read somewhere between amused and calculating. "Well, well, well, Bill Maher, I was told you'd chicken out." "I was told there'd be real wine, not Trump-branded grape soda," Maher fired back. Trump laughed, genuinely. "Let's eat. No cameras tonight, just people." The 3 men walked into the adjacent dining room, cozy, candlelit, unexpectedly intimate. A 4th place was set but unclaimed. Maher clocked it, wondering who the mystery guest was. The air carried a strange electricity, like everyone was waiting for the moment to crack, but no one wanted to make the first move. For now they sat, civil, curious, uneasy, and for the first time in their careers, off script. The conversation began, as all awkward ones do, with small talk stretched too thin. Trump commented on the renovation of the Rose Garden, gesturing toward the windows as if showing off a luxury condo he half regretted owning. Maher nodded politely, swirling his wine, offering the occasional dry remark that landed somewhere between wit and warning. Kid Rock, seated across from both men with a casual slouch, seemed amused by the tightrope being walked across the table. He cracked open a second bourbon and offered one to Bill, who declined with a shrug. "I prefer to remember this dinner, not survive it." The appetizers arrived, crab cakes and arugula salad, and with them the real dance began. Trump, half chewing, asked Maher how the ratings were on real time. "Better than yours after January 6, Maher replied, not unkindly but with the bite of someone who knew his lane. Kid Rock laughed too loud. Trump didn't. "You're still on HBO, right?" Trump asked, spearing a cherry tomato. "I always thought they'd cancel you for good." Maher smiled thinly. "They've tried. Turns out controversy sells. Same as your business model." Trump leaned back, sizing him up, and for a moment the table went quiet. There was no yelling, just that heavy, coiled silence that hangs in the air before something hits. Everyone at the table felt it. This dinner wasn't going to stay polite. Kid Rock tried to ease the moment. "It's kinda amazing this is even happening. Three guys who'd normally be taking shots at each other on stage, now passing the butter like we're on a reality show nobody greenlit." Maher's gaze lingered on Trump. "I didn't come here to be polite. I came to find out if there's still a line between theater and power." Trump raised an eyebrow. "You're the comedian, you tell me." The salad plates were cleared, but no one touched the bread rolls. Everyone at that table knew this dinner was about to get real, and no matter how expensive the wine or how rare the steak, the real entree was confrontation. It was only a matter of who would stick the first fork in. The air thickened as the main course arrived. Filet mignon, medium rare for Trump, grilled salmon for Maher, and a monstrous double-cut pork chop for Kid Rock. But food was now an afterthought. Maher leaned forward, his tone calm but edged with steel. "Here's what I don't get," he said, setting down his fork. "You say you care about truth, about fixing America, but half the time you're posting memes that make QAnon look like Sesame Street." Trump didn't flinch. He dabbed his mouth with a napkin and replied with that familiar smirk. "What is truth, Bill? The stuff your writers put in your monologues, or the narrative your side pushes through the networks that still pretend they're neutral?" Maher didn't blink. "Truth is provable. It's not whatever gets the most retweets. There used to be facts, now there are just feelings packaged with algorithms." Trump shrugged. "And yet your facts never seem to get people elected anymore." That stung. Not because it was entirely wrong, but because it pointed to a deeper issue neither man had fully said aloud yet. That the line between truth and influence had eroded, and no one in the room was innocent. Kid Rock finally spoke, chewing on a piece of pork chop. "You both sound like you've got microphones on right now. Come on, man. This isn't TV. We're not being edited tonight." Maher chuckled dryly. "That's the problem. We live in a world where being edited is safer than being honest." Trump's tone shifted, more serious, less performative. "You want to talk about filters? Try being me. I say one thing, and it gets turned into a headline that sounds like I declared war on Iowa." "Because sometimes it feels like you did," Maher shot back. "You blur the line between trolling and policy." "And you blur the line between comedy and preaching," Trump countered, pointing across the table. "You mock, condescend, and pretend it's all for laughs, but you know damn well you're shaping minds too." There it was. The mirror moment. Both men in vastly different ways had built platforms that influenced millions, yet both refused to see themselves as power brokers. To each, the other was the manipulator, the one distorting the truth. "You ever wonder what the country would look like," Maher said, his voice quieter now, "if everyone turned off their cameras and actually listened for 5 minutes?" Trump nodded slowly, not smiling this time. "Yeah, it'd look like this room. Awkward, uncomfortable, and a hell of a lot more honest than Twitter." Kid Rock raised his glass. "Here's to that, truth without filters, even if it pisses everyone off." The glasses clinked, but there was no celebration in the gesture, only acknowledgement. These weren't allies, they weren't even friends, but in that moment they recognized the same beast in each other. The burden of being heard in a world that no longer trusts anyone holding a microphone. As the plates were cleared and a second bottle of Cabernet was uncorked, the conversation drifted into murkier waters. The question of identity, not political identity, but personal. Trump leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. You know what amazes me, Bill? People think they know us. You, me, him. He nodded toward Kid Rock, who gave a mock salute with his drink. But they don't. They just know the version that shows up on their screen. Maher gave a sardonic laugh. That's rich coming from the guy who turned branding into a presidency. Trump didn't take the bait. You perform too, every week. You go out, you roast everyone, act like the smartest guy in the room, but I've watched you off camera. You're quieter, thoughtful, maybe even a little unsure. Maher tilted his head, intrigued. And you're saying you're not the guy screaming on Truth Social every morning? Trump cracked a smile. I didn't say that, but there's a difference between playing a role and living it. Sometimes the line blurs. Sometimes you wake up and you don't know which version of yourself people want. Kid Rock chimed in, his voice rough but surprisingly insightful. It's like stage lights. They shine so bright people stop seeing your face and start seeing what they want you to be. I say one redneck thing on a podcast and suddenly I'm the poster boy for every hillbilly with a beer can. Hell, sometimes I lean into it just to mess with them. Maher looked around the room, something softening in his face. We're all trapped, aren't we? Caricatures of ourselves. Reflections of what the audience expects. Trump nodded slowly. And God help you if you ever break character. The laughter that followed wasn't mocking, it was understanding. They were entertainers, provocateurs, lightning rods in an age where nuance was death and clarity came second to clicks. But in this moment, stripped of cameras and crowds, the characters fell away, and what remained, perhaps for the first time that night, were just men, flawed, famous, and painfully self-aware. Just as the conversation found a rare moment of stillness, Trump leaned in, elbows resting on the polished mahogany table, his tone shifting from reflective to calculated. So, here's a question, he said, glancing at both Bill and Kid Rock. What would happen if I didn't run as a Republican next time? The air seemed to thicken. Mahler's eyebrow rose immediately. You're talking about a third party, really? Trump didn't flinch. Not talking, considering, thinking bigger than elephants and donkeys. Kid Rock sat forward, suddenly more alert. Wait, you're serious? Trump nodded. The GOP's a mess. Half of them love me, half of them want me gone. They want my voters, but they don't want me. That's not loyalty, that's politics. And if I've learned anything in the last 10 years, it's that people are tired of politics. Maher blinked, studying him. You realize that would split the right straight down the middle. You'd be handing the Democrats the win. Maybe, Trump replied coolly, or maybe I pull from both sides. The working class, the independents, the ones who feel ignored. Who's really speaking for them? Not Biden, not the rhinos. Kid Rock let out a low whistle. You'd call it what? The Patriot Party? Trump smiled. Maybe, or something new, something people don't associate with the same old Washington games. Maher leaned back, skeptical but fascinated. You'd fracture your own base. But you'd also set the political world on fire. Again. Trump shrugged. It's already burning, I'd just be giving it a name. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was contemplative. This wasn't a headline grab or some off-the-cuff remark. There was weight behind Trump's words, and everyone at the table knew it. It wasn't just a hypothetical. It was a threat, a promise, a challenge to both parties. People would call it ego, Maher said finally. Of course, Trump replied, but history's full of people who got called egomaniacs before anyone called them presidents. Kid Rock shook his head, half impressed, half concerned. You'd change the game. No, Trump said, his voice low but sharp. I already did. This time, I'd rewrite the rules. The table went quiet again, not out of fear, but awe. Because whether they liked it or not, they all knew what Trump had just said wasn't crazy. It was entirely possible, and if he did it, it wouldn't just change the election. It would change the entire American political landscape. After dessert had been cleared and the conversation settled into a lull, Trump stood without warning and motioned for the group to follow. Come on, he said, already halfway down the hallway. There's something I want to show you. Maher exchanged a glance with Kid Rock, who who merely shrugged and drained the last of his bourbon. Dana White trailed behind, his usual stoic expression unreadable. They followed Trump through a series of ornate corridors, the grandeur of the residence fading into something quieter, older, more private. At the end of the hall stood two uniformed guards, beside a door few Americans would ever see. "This," Trump said as he opened the door himself, "is the Lincoln bedroom." The room exhaled history. Dim lamplight pooled softly around the iconic bed, its carved posts casting long shadows against cream-colored walls. On the far side, encased in glass, hung the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln's words penned in his own hand. Maher stepped in slowly, his usual sarcasm falling away. Even Kid Rock looked reverent. The silence was different here, not tense, but charged, like the room held more than just old furniture. It held memory. Trump stood near the desk, his hands in his pockets. "I bring certain people here, not the donors or photo op types, the ones I think need to remember that this job, this place, it's bigger than any one of us." Maher approached the framed address. "You think about legacy a lot, don't you?" "Wouldn't you?" Trump replied. "Lincoln got hated in his time too. They called him unfit, dangerous, even tyrannical, but he did what he thought had to be done." There was no punchline in Maher's response, and he never tried to stay longer than the people allowed. Trump met his gaze, expression unreadable. He also didn't live long enough to. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a deflection. It was something else, a moment of shared recognition between men who knew what it meant to be watched, judged, remembered. And as they stood there in that quiet room, history didn't feel so distant. It felt alive, flickering like candlelight in the air between them. Back in the main dining room, the mood had shifted again, less combative, more contemplative. The whiskey had mellowed nerves, and the Lincoln bedroom had left a strange, lingering gravity in the air. Trump had taken his seat again at the head of the table, swirling ice in his glass, as Kid Rock leaned back in his chair with a looseness that suggested comfort, not carelessness. Bill Maher, however, hadn't fully settled. Something gnawed at him, an unasked question that had followed him through the entire evening, growing louder with each round of political banter and historical name-dropping. So he asked it, "Are you seriously considering a third term?" The air thinned. Kid Rock froze mid-sip. Dana White, who had barely said a word since the tour, straightened in his seat. Trump didn't immediately answer. He looked up slowly, letting the silence do its work before breaking it. "Let me ask you this, Bill," Trump said, setting his glass down. "If you were me, and half the country still wanted you and the other half spent every day trying to erase you, would you walk away?" Maher didn't flinch. "That's not how democracy works." Trump raised an eyebrow. "And do you think it's working now?" There it was, both a challenge and a deflection. Maher leaned in. "There's a difference between fighting for your country and reshaping the rules so you can keep playing." Trump shrugged. "I'm just saying the people should decide. And right now a lot of people think the system's broken. If it is, who's going to fix it? The media? The bureaucrats? Or someone who's actually been through it?" Kid Rock broke the tension with a muttered "damn," but even he didn't laugh. This wasn't dinner table bravado, it was something more loaded. Trump hadn't said yes. But he hadn't said no, either. Maher exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Well, if you're floating that balloon, be ready for someone to pop it." Trump smiled faintly. "Let's see who's holding the pin." The room didn't erupt, no shouting, no slammed glasses, just four men sitting in the knowledge that the night had just crossed a line. And there was no going back. After the tension of the third term question, the room settled into a quieter rhythm, less confrontational, more introspective. The men weren't there to solve the nation's issues, but something about the weight of the previous exchange had shifted the mood. Even Trump, usually energized by combativeness, sat back with a thoughtful expression, drumming his fingers lightly on the polished table. Kid Rock, ever the wild card, broke the silence with a surprisingly sincere remark. "You know, the weirdest thing about tonight? I keep finding myself nodding along with the guy I thought I'd hate." Everyone chuckled, including Bill Maher, who raised his glass in mock salute. Careful, Bob. That's how cults start. But there was a shared acknowledgement in the room, something unspoken but present. Maher Trump, Kid Rock, and Dana White, 4 men from wildly different backgrounds and ideologies, found themselves circling around the same disillusionment. They all agreed that political discourse had become a blood sport, that the media's thirst for narratives over nuance had poisoned the public square, and that nobody seemed interested in listening anymore, only in winning. Dana, who had been quiet for most of the evening, leaned forward. "You can't even say 'I'm not sure' anymore without someone calling you weak. We've replaced curiosity with certainty." Trump nodded, surprisingly in sync. "And the second you say something that doesn't fit their box, they cancel you." Bill smirked. "Look at us, a president, a brawler, a rocker, and a comic, all basically saying the same thing. The middle's gone missing." Kid Rock lifted his glass again. "To the messy middle, where the real conversation happens." They clinked glasses this time not out of politeness, but maybe, just maybe, out of a sliver of shared hope. As the dinner wound down and the final course was cleared, a modest dessert of lemon tart and strong coffee, the energy in the room no longer crackled with debate. The sharp edges of ideology had dulled, leaving behind something far more unexpected: fatigue, honesty, and a strange kind of mutual respect. No one had won any arguments that night. There were no conversions, no sudden realizations that flipped political loyalties, and yet everyone at that table, Trump, Maher, Kid Rock, and Dana White, seemed changed in some small way, not because their opinions shifted, but because they had finally been seen beyond their brands. Bill leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a half-smile playing on his face. "You know, it's funny," he said, glancing around the table. "This is probably the most honest conversation I've had in months, and it happened in the White House with the 3 people I'm least likely to agree with." Trump didn't react with his usual bravado. Instead, he simply nodded. "That's the problem." Kid Rock stood, stretching with a groan. "Well, if this is what peace talks look like, maybe we ought to do it more often. Just leave out the duck next time." Laughter rippled through the room, not forced or awkward, but natural, like men who had gone 12 rounds in a verbal boxing match and still had enough left in them to shake hands. There were no cameras as they filed out, no statements prepared for social media, just a moment that belonged only to them. No one had scored points, no one had backed down, but for a few hours they had done something that felt increasingly rare in America. They listened, not to win, but to understand. Back in his hotel room, Bill Maher sat cross-legged on the edge of the bed, still in his dinner jacket, his tie loosened but not discarded. The city outside was quiet, but his mind wasn't. He reached for the hotel stationery, the kind nobody used anymore, and began scribbling notes with the same intensity he used when crafting monologues. But this wasn't for TV. This wasn't for laughs. This was for him. The questions, the contradictions, the weirdly civil tone of the evening, it all clung to him like smoke. He couldn't shake the image of Trump standing in the Lincoln bedroom, gesturing toward the Gettysburg Address as if to say, "Even giants were hated." There had been no spin, no performance in that moment, just a man who wanted his legacy to mean more than headlines and hashtags. Maher wrote slowly at first, then faster, thoughts pouring out in unfiltered lines. The scariest part of tonight wasn't what was said. It was how easy it was to say it, how human everyone became once the noise dropped out. He paused, stared at the paper, then added, "No applause, no cameras, just flawed men trying to figure out if conversation still means anything." He thought about the audience waiting back in LA, the ones who'd expect jokes and jabs, who'd cheer if he mocked Trump mercilessly. And yet, he couldn't lie, not to them, not to himself. What had happened tonight wasn't a conversion, but a confrontation with the truth. Maybe the real danger isn't in disagreement, but in refusing to sit at the table in the first place. Maher set the pen down and leaned back in the silence, knowing full well he was holding onto a story no one would believe, and one he wasn't sure he wanted to tell. In the stillness of that late-night room, with the notes tucked beside him and the city humming beyond the windows, Bill Maher let the evening settle. It hadn't been a summit, a strategy session, or even a real debate. It was dinner. Messy, strange, at times absurd, but real. And in today's world, that alone made it revolutionary. No handlers, no spin doctors, no gotcha edits. Just four wildly different men forced to share space, ideas, and duck confit. What struck Maher most wasn't Trump's political jabs or Kid Rock's bombastic remarks. It was the undercurrent of something deeper, something rare, restraint. Everyone had opportunities to erupt, to perform, to score points, but nobody fully took the bait. Maybe it was the walls, steeped in history. Maybe it was the absence of an audience. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maher realized this dinner wasn't about agreement. It was about the sheer act of sitting down. In a country fracturing across screens and sound bites, that alone felt defiant. Trump had floated wild ideas, Maher had pushed back, but neither stormed off. That mattered. In the end, the biggest truth wasn't spoken, it was lived. That even among figures built for conflict, civility hadn't died. It had just gone into hiding, waiting for a night like this to quietly reemerge. And maybe that was the point. Not a headline, not a viral clip, just proof that sometimes, in the least likely places, people can talk without tearing each other apart. A weird human dinner. No winners, no losers. Just a rare breath in a country forgetting how to breathe. The lesson from this story is striking in its simplicity. Real dialogue still matters, and it's possible even in the most unlikely rooms. In an age dominated by division, outrage, and performative debate, four public figures, Bill Maher, Donald Trump, Kid Rock, and Dana White, managed to sit down, share a meal, and talk. Not perform, not posture, but talk. They didn't walk away agreeing on everything, or even most things, but they listened. They pushed back without cutting each other off. They confronted hard questions without trying to score points. The dinner didn't resolve any great political divide, but it reminded everyone watching, directly or through Bill's quiet reflection, that not every disagreement has to end in destruction. When you strip away the audience, the stage lights, and the social media pressure, what's left is something rare: humanity. The bigger message? We don't need to agree to coexist. We just need the courage to show up, sit down, and listen. In a culture addicted to shouting, the most radical act might just be conversation. This story is proof that even across chasms of ideology and ego, there's still a path forward, one dinner table at a time.